You could tell us, how did your own journey with disability shape your understanding of identity?
My being so different growing up was actually a value that I actually had something to contribute with my personal experiences. So disability as an identity is still not recognized and not known and not supported.
It's not spoken about widely at all.
And yet it's very, very important because disability intersects every population. For many of us who you find that are content, look like we're at peace, we're people who recognize, understand our disabilities, and have learned how to disability manage. Okay, and that means we understand what we need to do to be able to do what we feel is important in our lives.
Today's guest is a national leader in disability advocacy and education. Hers is a story of not just overcoming, but a story of redesigning, of refusing to shrink identity into a checkbox, and of building systems that don't just accommodate, but belong to all of us. Dr. Mary Lee Vance is the director of the Disability Access Center and multiple accessibility initiatives at the California State University, Sacramento. She's also taught disability law for over 16 years, led access programs at top universities, and published extensively, including 5 major books on educational equity for students and professionals with disability. Now serving on the Association on Higher Education and Disability as an equity officer, she continues to shape how institutions understand disability as identity, culture, and civil rights. And she's joining us back here for this conversation. Welcome back, Dr. Vance.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Vance, we often talk about systems of access in abstract terms, policies, procedures, acronyms. But for you, this work is so deeply personal, rooted in both experience, identity, and urgency. So if you could tell us, how did your own journey with disability shape your understanding of identity?
So growing up, being the only child in my school system, actually the only child in any of my school systems until college with a physical disability, I just automatically knew I was different and I had different needs. And so, I didn't really think about myself as having anything special or anything like that. It just was what I was, So I had no real identity connected to it. It just, like, people have to go get their glasses changed and things like that. I had to go get my braces adjusted, and I'd lose screws once in a while in the hallways, and I literally would have screws loose, type of thing. And, I got to be very good friends with the custodian who would be trailing after me, finding my loose screws and helping me with the duct tape. And duct tape and I became very close friends, at an early age. So that kind of was my early exposure to really understanding some of the complexities of a disability. And then also, of course, being stared at. I would get stared at, and children, one of the things that would happen is parents would be walking with a child, and the child would look at me and say, "Oh, look at that girl. She walks funny," and then the parent would be like yanking the kid and saying, "Don't stare." And then that became a point where I recognized that people like us were supposed to be invisible, because we weren't supposed to be pointed at, we weren't supposed to be stared at.
How old were you when you had
that was back in grade school. I mean, I remember very early on, it was, "Look at that girl, she walks funny. What happened to you?" And those kinds of questions too. As an adult, now it's, "Oh, that lady walks funny," or something. But of course,
you still get those?
Not as frequently, but it depends on which state I'm in.
Okay.
But not so much in California, certainly, but and not so much as an adult. Now what happens is people just either stare or they kind of like the dead man walking. They see you, but they turn away. So that's a nonverbal, not good.
It's a cue, yes.
Yes, that they are not going to even recognize you. And so it is many times having a physical disability, you do feel like you are a dead man walking. People see you, but you're not really there because they choose to ignore you.
Based on what you just said and hearing you, oftentimes, and especially when you're young and you have a disability, you want to just make it seem like it's not there. So you reject it. You try to reject this. You know you have it, but there's an inner part of you that rejects it. Did you grapple with that?
I never rejected it because I never felt I had a choice. It was what it was. So what I tried to do instead was soften it, and by softening it, it was really, I always felt it was really my responsibility to reassure others that I was okay, that it didn't hurt, that
Wow.
it wasn't inconvenient or awkward. So it was never really about this is what you have to do for me. It was more about what do I need to do to make sure that you're comfortable with me.
So that extended beyond your household into the every environment that you stepped into.
Correct. Because
Doesn't that
within the
become
household is
burdensome?
normal.
Doesn't that become burdensome?
It became more burdensome in college, for example, and I became, during college, that was in the 70s, and that's when disability rights were first starting to become more of a thing. And I was in college at a time when administrators were starting to notice me. I was the only student of color and only student with a disability that that the administrators chose, actually, to appoint to various committees. So as a freshman, I was actually appointed by the chancellor to sit on promotion and tenure salary committees, to sit on accessibility committees. I was chosen to be on all of these administrative committees as a freshman.
Wow.
Because this was a time period when it was like we should have student representatives, we should have we should have people of color, we should have more diversity within our representation of here. And I got to be the one that was chosen for all of these different kinds of things.
So in a way, it worked out in your favor.
It did in a way because I learned about, and probably that's how I got into higher ed as a profession, because I learned so much about higher ed starting as a freshman, but also it wreaked havoc with my grades. So, I really spent a lot of time, maybe 60 hours a week, just on going to meetings.
Sheesh.
And being part of committees and organizations that really had nothing to do with my academics, but were really about what I'd been appointed to by the chancellor and by university officials that wanted to have that spot of color, that spot of diversity. So I was the diversity child.
But what an entryway.
It was interesting, and it was educational, and again, I think it paved the way for my recognizing that higher ed as a profession was probably where I belonged, because in a way I did feel connected. I felt that my being so different growing up was actually a value, that I actually had something to contribute with my personal experiences, and by being part of these committees, I then learned about how to be professionally communicating and be engaged and utilizing my personal experiences in a wider scope, wider perspective.
You've also spoken about disability not just as a medical condition, but a cultural and political identity. Can you expand more on that?
So, for example, at Sac State, we have a Disability Cultural Center. We are only one of still about maybe 24 disability cultural centers in the nation.
Is that right?
Correct. And we were the first one within the CSU system, and just one of just a handful in the state of California. And in other words, you know that almost every public university and private will have some form of multicultural center. They'll have some form of, ethnic connection center for African Americans, for Asian Americans, whatever. But you don't see disability cultural centers. Not with a frequency. And that was something that's really important, is because students that have disabilities wanted to find each other, in particular students on the spectrum, autism spectrum, and other populations that have a harder time finding connections and finding friends. They had no idea, nowhere to go to find other students who would be friends with them. And so by creating a cultural center, disability culture center, they knew that they could go in there and find people that also had disabilities, or at least could be allies. And that was the intent of that particular space, was to create that. So disability as an identity is still not recognized and not known and not supported.
It's not spoken about widely at all.
And yet it's very, very important, because disability intersects every population, every race, every age, every economic bracket. And all of us, regardless of who we are, what we are, at some point in our life, if we grow old enough, we will experience some form of disability, we will experience a...
Oh, Mary Lee, we're never going to get old. Don't you know that? We all
Okay.
live with this notion
We will
until we
live-
get there.
As we get younger, backwards,
Right.
we will experience losses of our functional
Yes.
abilities. We will find medicine bottles and prescription bottles harder to open. We will find it harder to read the small print. We will find all sorts of things that are more challenging as we get younger. But as a young person, it's no problem. And I
Right.
oftentimes wonder about who designs these packages, like hearing aid batteries nowadays. They're all individually sealed, and you need scissors to cut each battery out. And I'm thinking, like,
Sometimes
who
you end-
needs these hearing aid batteries? Not the young people who could just do this, but older people with difficult grips
With limited mobility, making it
and
easier.
it's like, although there are younger people that need hearing aids as well, batteries as well, but I mean, still, the majority of population that have hearing loss are individuals that are older and have a harder time opening those hearing aid battery packages nowadays. But anyway, that is the process and the reality of where we are. We need to recognize, we need to accept it, and we need to prepare ourselves as well as society for the aging and the disabling of Americans and our citizens, because that's who we are. We are going to experience the difficulty with climbing up steps, the
Right.
difficulty with reading and hearing and seeing, and we might as well prepare with technology, with universal design, to create a more accessible society so that we can live the life as full as possible for as long as possible.
Now, many people, because, we mentioned that disability is not widely spoken of because they
Correct.
see disability as a
negative.
a negative. It's a deficit.
Yes.
It's a limitation.
Yeah.
So how do you, given your experience personally as an educator, as an advocate, frame it differently and to really bring the conversation into focus? Because to your point, this is something we're all going to need in some capacity or another.
Correct. And again, that's if you're fortunate enough to live long enough, right?
True.
So
Yeah.
not everybody's fortunate. So I mean, that's the thing people need to recognize, is that if you're lucky enough, fortunate enough to live long enough, you will experience some form of disabling conditions as you age.
But sorry for interjecting, but going back to when you said if you live long enough, I was on social media and somebody was sharing their story of these young people. They've gone on trips overseas and they've consumed alcohol, which had high levels, and I'm not going to quote it because it slips my mind, so I'm not going to be accurate. But, the alcohol contained something that shouldn't be there, which led them to blindness. So now you have young children
Sure.
in their 20s, but we don't look at disability as a need
Right.
until life happens.
Right.
And it seems like life is just coming at us in this day and age, full speed at 100 miles an hour, some days,
Right.
if not more.
Well, as I referenced at one point earlier, what got me into working with disability services was wounded warriors. And wounded warriors were our people who served in the military. And some of them are young, very, very young, because many of them enlisted right after high school. And then as a result of having served in the military, they have acquired injuries,
Right.
whether or not psychological or physical, somewhere along the way. And so the thing is that, yes, disability is a natural human occurrence as you get older. It can also happen at any point in your life.
Right.
Disability is one of those weird fraternities, associations that happens to anybody regardless of whatever your background is.
It's the one that doesn't discriminate.
Right. And when you see someone in a wheelchair, you don't know if that person was born that way or whether or not they acquired it through some diving accident or were they in the military. I mean, there's so many different ways and reasons for how a person became the way they are. So one cannot assume that this is, quote unquote, the etiquette for how you handle somebody with a disability, because each of us comes to our disability at different times
Right.
and from different socioeconomic statuses, different racial, cultural backgrounds, and differences in general with religion and philosophy. So some of us may have disabilities, and we're just thankful to God that we're alive and God spared us and all that. And some of us are angry as hell,
Yes.
and we're pissed off, and we're going to bite your head off,
Yep.
So we have that whole gamut right there, right? So it's not like we're born with our race or our gender, you know. And of course, I understand that some people feel that they were born not in the race or gender that they feel they ought to be. But disability is absolutely one of those situations where you have no idea when and where it's going to happen.
Transcends everything.
Correct.
Okay. Marilee, when you are equipped with a disability, you live with an awareness of it, right? But is there any moment, and I know I cannot believe I'm going to ask this, but like a moment where you could say, okay, I've accepted and now I live with this with pride?
I'm not sure that the word is necessarily accept. I think that what it is that we come to terms. Mm-hmm. We come to terms with our conditions, okay? And not all of us, but I mean, like myself.
Right.
Early on, I came to terms with the fact that I had a condition that was never going to get better. Mm. And that's what polio is. Polio does not get better. Polio, you are at the peak of your health every day that you're still standing and doing whatever it is you're doing, right? And from there, because it's progressive, you will get worse, because that is what happens. Your muscles that exist still get more fatigued trying to carry the part of your body that has no muscles, because polio robs you of muscles. So I think that what happens is that for many of us who you find that are content, look like we're at peace, we're people who recognize, understand our disabilities, and have learned how to disability manage. Oh. Okay. And that means we understand what we need to do to be able to do what we feel is important in our lives.
When you said disability manage, from the conversation we had in the episode where you discussed about your being a Korean adoptee, you emphasized the importance of language. Mm-hmm. And so now I
right.
understand why that is so important.
Right. Yes.
And how, when you describe, I know how to manage my disability, it puts into context things a bit better.
Right. Because you're managing your disability. You own it. You're not a victim. And in fact, like with adoptees, I will also say to them as well, we are not victims. We're all survivors. We're survivors.
What is the key differentiator? Because aren't you a victim of the circumstance, but you've survived it due to being adopted?
There are stages. So, yes, we were victims at one time, but like anyone who's ever been a victim of some circumstance, you can choose to remain a victim or you can choose to then become a survivor. And people who are survivors are ones who have decided to take what was once a negative or horrific situation and decided to turn that around and make some form of not so much peace, but have turned it around to be able to coexist with it. Mm-hmm. You don't forget it. You
can't. It's a part of you.
No, and you don't necessarily move on from it, but you are able to recognize that it is a part of you,
right?
But it's not all of you, right? And one of the things that's interesting is that I didn't share this with the adoptee part, but when I was younger, when I was in the orphanage, one of the letters that Harry Holt wrote to my adoptive parents was that little Minja, she's pretty healthy overall, but she's a little plump. She's a very good eater. And there were several letters that referenced the fact that I was a good eater and I was plump. And I thought, I don't really like those references as an adult reading those letters.
Of
I
course.
thought, why is this always being said that I was plump and I'm a good eater? And yes, I did like food. I still like food. But why did that have to be such a big, important part of the letter? Well, what I learned later on from talking to the people who escorted orphans and who worked in orphanages was the fact that if you were not a good eater in an orphanage, you didn't survive. So a person who is a good eater is a survivor.
Oh, wow.
Because otherwise, if you were depressed and you didn't eat,
right,
you didn't make it.
To more health ailments and so forth.
You weren't going to survive. So I guess that's where I thought, okay, I'm a survivor. I'm an eater.
Okay, and thank you for that context and that differentiation. That's really, really helpful. You've also, you teach about moral, medical, and social justice through models of disability.
Correct.
I am unfamiliar with these terms. I'm sure many listening in are also unfamiliar.
Sure.
So could you please walk us through each of these modalities?
So there's no one sequential way of looking at the models. They can coexist, they can intermingle, and you can be in different models at the same time. But the moral model is basically a model that takes its context from religious versions of how one looks at less fortunate people. So one looks at less fortunate people with pity and compassion, or you might look at people who are different and consider them to be wicked and people you need to avoid. So there are those two prongs. So you know the fairy tale stories that always talk about wicked people. Wicked people always have hunchbacks. They always are scarred. They limp. There are all these things. Captain Hook, all of these stories of people that are wicked. They always have some form of disfigurement. And in fact, in the United States, we had back in the 30s, we actually had ugly laws, where it was actually illegal to be seen in public if you were considered to be ugly.
I was not aware of
so
this.
It's a whole book called Ugly Laws, and you can look it up, Ugly Laws. And so if you were disfigured, it would actually be considered to be absolutely inappropriate, illegal. And in fact, if you saw the movie like Elephant Man, there's a scene in there where he explains the fact that he has this condition because his mother, when she was pregnant with him, saw an elephant, got scared, and that's why he has this this debility, this condition. And because at that time it was if a mother got scared or whatever, the baby would be deformed. And so the moral model basically is the belief that if you did something bad, you might get penalized for it, or future generations would be penalized for something that was bad in your family. So we're going to have to stay away from you because you're evil, or you might be connected to evil.
Right.
Or you poor thing, we need to do everything for you. We need to feed you because, the Bible teaches us to be compassionate. And so it's all this pity, moral model. The next model is a medical model. And that medical model basically says that, we know there's nothing religious. We know there's nothing about your, whether or not you've been good or bad, but something happened to you, some disease, virus, or, something else. And if you take this medication, you do this therapy, if you take this responsibility to improve yourself, then you can fit within our society. And so the responsibility goes to the individual to basically follow through with therapy, with medication, because there's something wrong with them and they need to be treated and they need to be doing these things in order to fit in. And if you don't get cured, if you don't get better, then unlike the moral model, which you don't have the faith as big as a grain of a mustard seed, in the medical model, it just means you just, are not doing what you need to do. And so obviously, how can you expect that everything be made accessible to you, right? Mm-hmm. Both moral model and medical model objectify the individual with a disability. The individual that has a disability has no say in how you perceive them. In the social justice model, it is understood that society has a responsibility to individuals that have disabilities. Society needs to build ramps. Society needs to be conscious of the fact that some people can't see, some people can't hear, and we need to make this world be accessible so that those individuals have equal access into society. Social justice model includes that individual and makes them be a part of society, part of that decision. They're not objectified.
So, on your moral model, you say we're taught to look at people with pity and, people with disabilities, let me correct myself, with pity and compassion. Or the other opposite, let me stay away from you, I don't know what you have. We are taught, though, is when you see a person with disability, usually, to see them as a person first, with compassion. Because I don't want to, I see your disability, but I'm trying to bridge the gap. I'm not trying to alienate you. So I will lead with compassion. You're a person to me first, then your disability second.
See, that's very interesting because now you're talking about language in a way that I would say we need to think through that. So, for example, what you're talking about is language that would be called People First Language, PFL, versus DFL, which would be Disability or Identity First Language. All right? So we understand pronouns, right? We understand how some individuals want to be called she, her, hers, or him, his, and they,
and so
them,
forth, yes.
whatever. Everyone has a right to their pronoun. They also have a right to determine that some days I believe this pronoun versus another day I may choose not to be, right? So we're not to assume anyone's pronouns. We have not gotten to a stage yet where we recognize that individuals, because of the diversity of how someone becomes disabled, that they also have a different way of looking at language, all right? So
Yes.
there are individuals who prefer to be called people first.
Yep.
They want you to say, I am a person first. Don't look at my disability, eyes up here, not down here, or whatever else it is.
Yes.
And then there's individuals like myself, for example, who say, you know what? There's my scooter. Here are my crutches. I need you to see my disability. I need you to recognize my disability, because if you don't, how can I trust that when you're at the table talking about accessibility and you're at the table talking about inclusion and diversity, that you're actually remembering me and other people who have other kinds of accommodation or accessibility issues, right? If you only see the person, you're not seeing the full me.
You bring up such an interesting point, and I'm having this recognition right now in hearing you speak, is because if I lead with people first language, then because I see you and I don't see your disability, if I sit at the table where I'm a decision maker, I'm going to say, well, he's just a person. He's just like me. Yes, he or she may have a disability, but I treat them as a person first, which means I will always ignore your needs for the things that are needed. Systems that need to be in place for your accessibility, which is why we're not moving the needle as fast as we ought to, because we're seeing you with compassionate eyes, which we need to as well, but we also need to recognize that there's a need that still needs to be filled.
And it's kind of like, think about the 60s when the Black Power, the Black is Beautiful movement, right? The whole emphasis on color and race. This was essential because there was discrimination going on everywhere.
Right.
And so if you did not see that Black women did not have, access to the bathrooms because only for whites, et cetera, then how could you advocate for diversity, or how could you advocate for equity, et cetera? And so the thing is, there had to be a recognition of color before you were able to recognize the fact that there was discrimination and that there was a need to rectify, right? If you don't see disability, you're not seeing the barriers.
Yes.
And the barriers that are both psychological, mental, non-visible, as well as visible. So we did pretty well with the 1990 ADA. We've done pretty well with architectural barriers. We've done pretty well. It's not perfect, but done better than it was. But we haven't done as well with psychological, mental, non-visible disabilities in terms of recognizing those kinds of barriers that students, for example, experience, as in learning barriers, psychological barriers that would prevent their attendance, that would prevent their ability to be able to fully participate equally in the classroom as other classmates. So these barriers are important, and that's why disability as an identity, as real as racial, as real as gender, needs to be recognized as being a valid identity, needs to be recognized and understood as being an identity that experiences barriers.
Let me ask you this. For you have been, in your personal experience, but being an educator, being a leader, and being an advocate, from you growing up to where we sit in present day, 2025, how far have you come along? And what are the essential things that should have been taken care of, let's just even say in the last decade, that hasn't been? Without opening up a big can of worms, I think I just did.
Oh, you sure did. You sure did. First of all, we have a current administration that should never come into being, because everything that has been accomplished this far, which was still lacking, is like climbing a glass mountain covered with margarine.
And you're seeing that unfold in real time right now.
Absolutely. Everything. Anti-DEI movement,
Yes,
discrimination against disabled populations, push back against anything that is not considered to be important to the current. This is all going on real time. This is back in we're pre-60s. We're in the 50s.
In 2025.
Yes. We are approaching that right now. We are erasing every achievement and accomplishment that we were making towards societal equal access. We're pushing back, and we're allowing it to happen. And so that means that certain foundations of architecture will still continue and exist, but there won't be any new initiatives to ensure that future buildings will meet the same safety codes and accessibility. There are no guarantees that there will be inclusion and equal opportunities for women, people of color, disabled, and et cetera, to be immigrants, people of other nationalities and religions to be able to be in the same workplace as others. We're seeing a real major backstep here, and that's really unfortunate. So, yeah, I think prior to this election, I was on an optimistic journey. I was thinking that we were making achievements. There were still gaps. There were still places we had to work on. The battle was not over with. But you knew you could get there,
yeah.
But we were going to get there. But now it's like total reversal. We're sliding down that glass mountain very fast.
So knowing that you had works in progress, you have changes to make, and changes take time, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of back-end stuff.
Sure.
So given what you said, how do you then proceed forward? How do you fight that uphill battle? Because whether we like it or not, right? Everybody has strong opinions. Yeah. We've got a sitting president in office for the next 4 years. Mm-hmm. So how do you make... Well, yes. How do you continue to fight the good fight?
And again, it's not even just the president.
Right.
We're talking about the administration. We're talking about all of everyone else who's been supportive and being part of his.
And also, it boils down to state and individual foundations and private businesses as well, and how they want to incorporate something that's coming from federal into their own day to day. What autonomy do people want?
Yeah. Well, basically, what's going to happen is. There are fortunately enough people. There are still people who have values and who have integrity and who recognize social justice, who are not letting this slide. And so while we are sliding down that glass mountain, I don't think that the battle is over. And I think that there are people that are pushing back. We do know that there are people pushing back. We do know that for every executive order that comes out that is pushing back, that there has been people who oppose it, judges who have been trying to stall things. So it's not by any means ideal situation, but at least there are people that have backbone commitment, and they are trying to continue the work. And so one can choose to be part of that, or one can choose to sit back and say, it is what it is, right? Mm-hmm. I still feel like there is work to be done.
Yes, there's always work to be done.
And I'm fortunate that I'm at a campus where we have a president that I think is very progressive, our Sac State president. And I think that overall, in fact, just to go a step further, we actually had a vacancy with our vice president for DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion. And rather than covering it up and letting it die like many universities have, we actually had a search, and we're in the process of hiring a new VP for DEI.
Amazing.
So that tells you a little bit about the environment I happen to be in right now. Of course, there's also California. So, I mean, there's some things about California that are unique from other parts of the country, which, are very good. But hopefully, but we're not the only ones. You look at Harvard. You look at some of these other universities that are pushing back, and they're like going, take our federal funding, do whatever you need to do, but we're going to do what we're going to do.
Yeah, I can go.
So people are pushing back.
I have to be very careful because I can chime in on that, but
I know
that's not why we're here. Because it'll go in a different direction.
No,
but I do want to say is when I first met with you to broach you for being a guest on my podcast, which I'm so grateful to have you sitting here today in front of me. And we went around the campus, which is the California State University of Sacramento. And
Correct.
it makes me so proud to be an
alum,
alumni.
yes.
And I did my undergraduate
Yes.
at Sac State. So, and
Stingers up.
yes, and to see the progress that has been made. Because when you talked about
Yeah.
disability and the cultural center
Yeah.
and the need for it
Yes.
in the beginning of the episode, I was trying to rack my mind, and this is also a give or take about just shy of 20 years ago when I was there. I don't remember it being there or occupying the space it has right now when you took me on the tour of campus. So it's just so great to see. And again, too, I'm trying to, when I walked away with my meeting from you, I was trying to rack my brain and recall that were we taught about the need for these services, and no, they weren't, unless you were in the class, in a prerequisite class where you brush upon some history and, they emphasize on it, but it wasn't really touched upon at all.
We've got some faculty on campus who I've been pulling together, and actually one of the initiatives I'm planning to continue working on, which I started, is to develop a disability studies minor.
Oh, wow.
So we have faculty on campus that already do teach about disability, gender and disability, history of disability, et cetera, et cetera. And these faculty are very interested in wanting to be part of such a minor. And by developing a disability studies minor, we then recognize, again, it
Right.
has an identity, like women's studies.
Yep.
And all these other studies, which, right now are controversial, but when they were first being evolved and being developed, were recognized as being finally a recognition of these different identities, right?
Do you know, to your knowledge, if there's any other institution, academic institution in our nation that actually has this?
There's several.
Okay.
Like New York, and I don't know them all right away,
Of
but
course.
we're not certainly the first one.
Okay,
But
that's good.
we will definitely be one of the first ones within the CSU system.
That's
If we can get this off the ground,
That makes me even prouder to be an alumni.
Yes.
Okay, going back to when you're talking about the moral, medical, and social justice models of disability, what are the risks when institutions operate from one of them? They just pick, like, just say medical, and say we're going to really look at the medical perspective. And how does that hinder?
Well, the medical model, of course, we see that all the time because it's a medical profession, and they objectify the patient. The patient is a patient. Patient is a medical enigma. It's a mystery, right? And so we look at the patient and say, what do we need to do? We diagnose the patient. We provide a therapy or medical regime for that patient, right? And then the patient either follows through and it gets cured, medically healed, or whatever, or it doesn't. And this is how the medical model works, basically. And when we look at a student and we look at them through the medical model lens, we're basically saying, okay, you need to, this is what your disability is, these are your conditions, and these are the things you need to do to fit in our society. And that's very flawed because there are responsibilities. Everyone has responsibilities as well as rights. And as a disabled individual, we have rights and responsibilities that we must be mindful of. So my responsibility, as I see it, is I have responsibilities to buy my own scooters. I buy my own hearing aids. Those are personal objects, accessories that I require and need for my personal ability to navigate life. Those are not society's responsibilities, but it's society's responsibility to make sure that there's an elevator, that there's ramps,
Right.
that there's microphones, that there's access, and that I can go in there with my accessories, my items I need to have, and be able to have equal access like any other concert, participant in anything, right? So responsibilities are that we have to accept the fact that we may actually have to speak up. We may have to be actually letting people know if something is lacking, if we want something to happen. And sometimes people will sit back and say, well, that's not my responsibility. Someone else should say that there should be this or that.
I
It's
get
like,
so tired of hearing that buck just being passed around. It's not mine.
Right.
It's not mine. 10 people down. And
it's like, but you're the one that's being impacted. You're being impacted, so whose responsibility is it? And yes, no, you should not have to always be the one that has to always be the one pointing out that there's a flaw or that there's a limitation here. But you certainly can team up with other people. You can certainly be a part of the process of educating others. So we do have a role with educating others, even though we may not want to, and even though we think it's not our responsibility. It has to be someone's responsibility.
don't you get tired and like with people of disability and it's just like, I mean, we're talking about this subject, but any subject at a certain point of people who belong to in that or feel they belong to that, don't you get tired?
Sure. Lots of times I get tired. And there's a lot of times I wake up in the morning and go, I'm too old for this, fill in the blank.
Right.
You know what I mean? But then you kind of go, well, you either can give up and curl underneath the blankets and just say, I'm going to die right now, or you're going to go out and face the world, right? And again, we have to understand that it's like in the Korean adoptee world, one of the things that happens for a Korean adoptee who has never been aware of their adoption status in terms of really understood what it means, where they came from, et cetera, is that recognition of where North and South Korea is, for example. And so sometimes they get really offended when someone asks them, well, what part of Korea did you come from, North or South? And it's like, South Korea of all things, and they get offended. And it's kind of like I look at them and I say to them, you, like a couple of months ago, didn't even know yourself. Why do you expect everyone else to suddenly magically know this information that you only yourself are aware of, right?
And I chuckle because that dialogue has been circulating around social media that I've seen come up quite a lot, and a lot of people are very unhappy about that.
Yeah, but it's like any kind of awareness of your identity, any kind of awareness at all. When you're faced with that stupid question or that redundant question or that repetitive question, you can't get constantly annoyed when someone asks you those questions because it happens.
Yeah.
And so you have to understand how to cope with that question. And for me, when I get asked that annoying question, any annoying question, like where are you from? No, where are you really from?
I get asked that too.
Where are you really from, hoping that they get to your great ancestors that finally get to that root of whatever, and you keep saying Brooklyn, New York, it's not going to work.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But the thing is, when you finally recognize that the question that's being asked of you is coming from a certain place, then you know how to answer it. Okay, so is a person asking me the question because they genuinely have a curiosity and they want to learn, like a child, for example? Or are they asking me this question because they feel they're entitled to the answer?
I feel like it's more of that.
Yes, and if that's the case, then you respond likewise, right? But if it's a child, or someone who generally is interested, then you might put on more of the educational facade. But if it's someone who's acting entitled, then you might say, it might be nice to just exchange names first.
Right.
Suddenly you just jump to that question, right? Or you just ignore them, but treat them as rudely as they treated you. Right? You determine case by case. You have to do that. You have to understand that that's going to happen. You're going to be asked these stupid questions. What happened to you? Does that person have a right to ask you that question? Maybe they do, maybe they don't.
Okay, fair enough. You have also spoken about the intersection of ableism and racism. So before we go any further, could you define the two? Racism, I think everybody knows, but I think the definition would still be helpful. And ableism, I think people know of it, but it's not spoken about widely.
Right. So racism, of course, we know is the fact that we believe that there is a race that is more superior than others. We believe we are more comfortable with a race or races than with others, okay? And so racism would be projecting those beliefs onto the races that, make you comfortable or uncomfortable. Disability and ableism works the same way, We know that there are certain individuals that have disabilities, different kinds of disabilities, that are more comfortable than others. We are more comfortable with someone in a wheelchair, for example. We're kind of, we're kind of tuned into the wheelchair symbol, and we're also tuned into the person that's kind of like passive in the chair. Sometimes they're athletes, but mostly they're passive, right? And then, but we're less comfortable with, say, the psychological, the ones
Yes.
with, emotional, psychological, because that's not visible, and then it manifests itself in ways that make us very uncomfortable, right?
Correct.
So those are the things about disability that we need to understand, in terms of whether or not we are comfortable or not. So ableism would be the fact that we feel that we are more comfortable with certain disabilities and certain people than others. It also might be ignoring the fact that you have certain accommodation requirements, and I don't think you need them. So, like, for example, you're in a room that's a large conference room, and there's a microphone in front of you, but you'll sit there and say, I can speak loud enough. I don't need the microphone. That's ableism, because there's someone in the room that has a hearing loss, and they need you to use the microphone. You may think you speak loud enough, but really you don't. And if you've ever noticed a room full of people, if they're around a table like this, they're all talking normally like this, but then when you say, let's go around the room and let's have everybody introduce themselves, suddenly their voices drop.
Yes.
They'll be talking like this, and they'll say, well, my name is so, and I work in some department. And I'm like, what did they say? And it's like, why do they do this? So that's ableism. Those are examples of the more obvious ableism.
Those are everyday interactions. There's simple things that we don't recognize, but it's such a standard unconscious practice, and I guess unconscious bias in our actions.
And ableism is also like, we know a certain individual, high profile, who's made fun of individuals by mocking movements and motions of individuals that have CP and involuntary movements. When you start mocking, making fun of someone based on how their physical appearances, those are forms of ableism, microaggressions, and aggressions. So, but in the thing is that leads into, obviously, talking about history, talking about, like, during the early days, it even leads into eugenics and genocide.
Could you please take a moment to expand?
Yes.
I think it will be helpful.
Certainly. So we understand that during World War II, that Hitler had concentration camps. They were basically extermination camps. What's lesser known is that there were also that there was a weeding out of individuals that had disabilities. Going back even further, the ideal Aryan race was about people who fit the pure Aryan appearance, physical appearance, which included individuals that were perfect specimens, not ones that had disabilities. We know about the Star of David that all people of Jewish descent had to wear. We know about the pink triangle that was used to identify individuals that are considered to be sexual deviants. What's lesser known is the fact that there was a black triangle, and the black triangle was used to identify those individuals that had disabilities that were actually lucky enough, per se, to survive the immediate sorting out process.
Oh my God,
and they were allowed
so
to live.
Inhumane.
They were allowed to live because they were either used for labor or medical experiments. And in particular, twins, triplets, multiple births were fascinating for Mengele.
Yes.
But not only that, but other people that had disabilities were utilized for medical experiments. And then, of course, exterminated once their usefulness was over with. The black triangle was used to identify disabled individuals, which is why this particular thing right here, this is the graphic on our shirt. And this, I don't know if you can see, the camera can pick that up. It shows a person in a wheelchair. Wheelchair is in motion, person in a wheelchair. You also see in the middle a black triangle, which is a representation and trying to basically pay respect to that part of history.
Yes.
And then you see around it a sunflower pattern. And the sunflower pattern is actually an international symbol for non-visible disabilities, because we do recognize the wheelchair as being an international symbol for physically disabled, but there has not been as much attention to the non-visible disabilities. So the sunflower pattern is being used internationally as being that symbol.
And that is for?
That is our graphic for our Disability Access Center.
For Sacramento State.
For Sac State,
Okay,
correct.
okay.
That is something that I created.
Yeah.
Continuing
on this, because you said eugenics, and you talked about...
Yes.
Yes.
So eugenics, people don't understand and recognize the fact that eugenics actually was developed in the United States.
Can we take a moment to describe what it is?
Eugenics is really the study of your ancestry, your DNA, and being able to determine through your genetics whether or not you carry certain kinds of genes and traits to the next generation. So eugenics is a science, medical science, that was developed in the United States.
Okay.
And was used and abused as a way to legitimize and justify the forced sterilization of individuals that society at that time deemed to be ones that should not be allowed to procreate. So particularly people of color, particularly women who were considered to be unmanageable, particularly people that had disabilities of any sort, particularly criminals, people who were incarcerated. All of these individuals were subject to forced sterilization. And if you read history about forced sterilization and who was subject, Native Americans in the BIA, the United States exercised forced sterilization very, very generously. Hitler was intrigued by the concept of eugenics and took it a step further, which then became genocide. And genocide then was incorporated to exterminate entire race and also to exterminate individuals that had disabilities, anyone who was considered undesirable and not part of what they consider to be the ideal race that should exist.
Based on this now historical context, is that why you say that disability rights are civil rights?
Correct. So disability rights are civil rights because back in 1964, when civil rights was being pushed for, and Rosa Parks was fighting to be able to sit in the front of the bus, while she was sitting in the front of the bus, people in wheelchairs and scooters and walkers were chaining themselves to the front of the bus because they couldn't get on the bus. And so when the Civil Rights Act was signed into law, lots of populations were considered protected.
This part, that you mentioned is not spoken about as much.
No, this is why we need disability history.
Yes.
And this is why disability studies is such an important curriculum.
Yes, continue, and then I'll interject.
The contributions and the history and the intersection of ableism and racism and the fact that there is a shared history of eugenics and genocide and discrimination and the intersection of the two. Because think about it, when Black Lives Matter, when we were hearing a lot about Black Lives Matter and all these individuals that are getting beaten up in the streets, what was lesser advertised and publicized was that many of those individuals had disabilities, pre-existing disabilities.
It was barely talked about or barely mentioned.
And certainly as a result of having been violated and abused and beaten, there was post-trauma.
Of course.
And certainly post-physical disabilities, right? Disability and racism intersect. Ableism and racism, they are intersecting. You cannot talk about racism without bringing in ableism and disability. You can't talk about disability without also understanding that certain races have higher levels of disabilities, different kinds of disabilities, and different histories of disability discrimination.
But I didn't understand, nor was I aware of the intersection and the weaving of the civil rights component of it and how layered it is and how they all lead to the big picture.
Well, it goes further. So during the civil rights movement, of course, we know about the Black Panthers. We know about all of these populations that got together and fought for their rights, okay? However, in that movement and in the final law, disability was not identified. That was 1964. In 1973, Section 504 was signed into law, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. It was signed into law but had no regulations. No regulations means there's no accountability for anyone who broke the law. So if anyone was denied access to a state, federal building, there was no repercussion for that denial. That did not happen until 1977 when a group of disabled individuals, actually 150 of them in Berkeley, took over the federal building in San Francisco. They took over for a month, and they survived in that federal building. They were medically fragile people, and they survived in that building only because the Black Panther Party and other individuals who fought for civil rights in 1964 understood that disability had been excluded in the Civil Rights Act,
so they became
and they
the allies.
banded together, and they were allies for the disability rights movement and the Section 504 regulations. And then, right, and then that is not even the end of the battle, because Section 504, the Rehab Act, only really talked about physical access and equal access, but it didn't talk about job security, employment, access, housing, et cetera, which 1964 Civil Rights Act did. That didn't happen until 1990. And that is why the ADA, the 1990 ADA, is considered the Disability Civil Rights Act.
Thank you for that context.
One more thing.
Yes.
The Black Panther Party that was so instrumental with the Oakland, and the San Francisco occupation of federal building was partially led by a guy named Brad Lomax. Brad Lomax started the Black Panther Party in Washington, D.C., and then he moved to Oakland. And then while he was in Oakland, in California, he was very active, of course, with the Oakland Black Panther Party, which had at that time a hot breakfast program for poor, underprivileged children. Mm-hmm. They took that model of feeding the underprivileged children breakfast, and that's how they fed the occupants of the federal building who were protesting the lack of regulations for the Rehabilitation Act. And Brad Lomax, by the way, was also by that time a wheelchair user because he had acquired MS. So it became personal, as well as also the political issue. Mm-hmm. So intersectionality, Right. And the father of ADA, the man who we call the father of ADA, 1990, was a man who was post-polio, who, when he was on the stage, talking, would oftentimes use a quote from Martin Luther King that basically said, justice anywhere is an injustice to everyone. In other words, basically saying that it's not appropriate to have injustice anywhere for any population. Right? So that, again, that intersection of Martin Luther King and the ADA movement, that intersection of ableism, racism, sex, and Title IX. I'm bringing Title IX. I'm sorry, but
that's all right.
I did that as well. That's later. But anyway, the intersection of Civil Rights Act and the 1990 ADA. That is why civil rights, disability rights, are civil rights. And we have to remember that, because right now, what people, going back to disability considered being perceived as a negative and being kind of a deficit model.
Yes.
It is a hard-earned battle, hard-earned victory.
Sometimes you turn a blind eye to.
Correct. Well, yeah. And it's also something that when you look at it, we're not recognizing the fact that it is a civil right. It's not a medical model thing. It's not pity. It's about the fact that we have a right to equally access that ice cream shop that has 3 steps going up to it. I have as much right to get fat as anyone else.
You say equal. We look at it as a specialty.
Yes.
It's a special need.
Special treatment, special thing.
But because that common language is not exercised, it's been replaced by a vocabulary that not only it separates, but to a certain extent, I'm going to borrow from you, I'm not sure if it's apt here, but objectifies.
Yes, it objectifies, yes, correct. So the thing is that we need to remember and recognize the fact that disability rights are civil rights, and that when you have to take someone who is in a wheelchair and you have to put a temporary ramp down so they can access the building, it's not about special treatment. It's about the fact that there was a denial of the equal access to begin with. So there should have been a ramp there to begin with. And then you wouldn't have to do this quote unquote special treatment
But
for
that
someone.
that would mean that you have to go back to your architect, make special amendments. Then money is in play, and then you think about, well, if there's 100 people but only one person needs it, is it really that important? Because
Right.
the other
Yes.
out of the 100, only one
Yes.
person needs it. The other 99 are fine.
Right. So when I was
So
in
it becomes
college,
selfish.
When I was in college, I was asked basically that same question because I was advocating for the fact that the administrative building was 3 stories high and there was no elevator. And I said, we need an elevator. And they said, why should we build a multi-million-dollar elevator when we only have one student who's in a wheelchair? And oh, by the way, the student union, there's no elevator either for passengers. And we have a man who's a manager. And the lack of elevator hasn't stopped him from doing his job. He crawls up those 3 flights of stairs every day.
How did you respond? What did you do?
First of all, I was shocked. But secondly, I said, maybe if we had an elevator, there would be more individuals. There might be more wheelchair users. Mm-hmm. And I would tell that to people like going downtown. I was young. I was a college kid. We went to bars. And that was always the question was whether or not the bathrooms would be accessible, the bartenders and people like that be like, why should we worry about that, And I'm like going, well, because maybe you might have more people coming here then.
Right.
If they could use the bathrooms, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but I oftentimes go in the restrooms and find people who are not in wheelchairs or scooters in the accessible stall. That's okay.
Yeah.
It's fine. That's everyone can use those stalls, but the people who need them, that's their only choice. Mm-hmm. They don't have the choice of all the other stalls. They need that stall.
Yes.
And it needs to be there.
Yes.
So those are some of the things that people don't necessarily think about is that if you build in, it's like the field of dreams. You build it, they'll come, right?
True. Absolutely
and so
true.
I think that when we look at accessibility in general, and it's like the motto that I believe in that I quote a lot and that I created basically, and that is I have a disability, but it is not disabling unless I've been disabled by poor planning. Mm-hmm. And poor planning is there's no elevator. Poor planning is I can't hear because there's no microphone. I can't understand what's going on the stage because there's no captioning.
Yes.
Not everybody knows sign language, so it's nice to have an ESL interpreter down there, but I'm in the back and I can't hear. But captioning would be lovely if I could read it, So you need to build that in to begin. So that's where you were talking about. It has to be built into beginning so you don't do retrofitting.
Yes, and I am learning so much from you, and it's so powerful to sit across from an educator. Of course, this is your lived experience too, but education and bringing so much historical data and context, because I feel like some of it is being removed in front of our very eyes.
It's been forgotten. It's been sanitized. It's been erased.
It's been so sanitized for it to become digestible. But for who? I mean, just because it doesn't sound pretty, because we want everything to have a pretty little bow on it to be aesthetically pleasing, history is not aesthetically pleasing.
Well, it depends on who you're looking at. But the thing is, if you really, really want to understand history, the good, bad, and the ugly. Yes. That is history. But if you only want to listen to certain parts of history and only be aware of certain parts of history, well, then that is obviously some people like to live within that bubble.
And that's okay. And I'm not saying that that's not okay. But it narrows down the scope of your vision, of your arguments.
It also cheats the historical contributions of individuals who have contributed
and
to our
way.
Society. Right. I mean, Judy Heumann, if you've ever watched the documentary, which was on Netflix, Crip Camp.
I haven't yet,
is important. It's very important for understanding Section 504. Judy Heumann was born in New York, and she had to navigate life as a post-polio in a wheelchair, and she was not allowed to even go to public school because her wheelchair was considered to be a fire hazard. And when she wanted to be certified to teach in a classroom, she had to be interviewed by a panel of able-bodied males who basically said to her, we are concerned about your health, safety, and we need you to demonstrate how you would use the bathroom. And she's a chair user, post-polio. And she was supposed to demonstrate how she would transfer
is so
to a toilet to
humiliating.
them. Yes. This is part of the history. This is how we got to be where we are today with the level of accessibility with toilets and bathrooms and the knowledge that individuals
Because
in wheelchairs can be
able-bodied
teachers.
people had to see it with their own eyes, how a person would need those services. That person put themselves through the humiliation so we could have the accessibility stalls that we have today.
A lot of history. Just think about how women and people of color
I feel
in
like
every population in the United States, what they have had to go through to have us be where we are today. That's why the younger generation that doesn't understand and know history is cheated, number one, but also is deficit, because if they don't understand all of this history, all they see is, I'm inconvenienced because my Uber, whatever, isn't where it should be. It's like, girl, do you understand? It's like, yeah.
Yes, we make the inconveniences the biggest hardships.
Yes. And I remember the days when the internet, when I was at Michigan State at the time, when we first got access to a student information system online in a computer, a real computer. Because prior to that, computers were like in these sterile environments. You had to wear like the little booties and stuff like that, little paper booties and little hats, and it was sterile. So when I first got my first PC at Michigan State as a full-time employee, it was huge. But the thing is that when you got into that world, it was like a totally different environment, and having that access was just totally different. And
I bet.
when you look at where we are today, it's just so many worlds apart.
Yes. It seems like from a different era altogether, but it was just lived through, and we're living through it. And what we had said in the very beginning of the podcast is regressing back to some of those mannerisms.
Yes, yeah. And when you think about, but the thing is, I've been experienced a lot through my years,
and you've seen the transformation,
and I've seen where we're going. It was positive. And I see where we are now, which is a little bit disturbing. But I don't feel that it's the end. It just means that we have to push a little harder. And we'll probably have to repeat the 60s.
That's terrifying.
On the other hand, maybe not. Because I think, like going back to the young people who take for granted everything that's going on and their lack of ability to understand how to surf the internet to actually build a resume, but they do know how to surf the internet to find the latest whatever popular culture thing. I mean, there's disconnect here. But when you look at the young people, younger generations who don't know the history of how they were able to enjoy where they are today with all the benefits, maybe it is good for them to finally be having to be aware of and becoming part of something where they have to be part of building.
You have a terminal degree. What does terminal degree mean?
Yeah. So a terminal degree basically means I have a PhD.
Okay.
And I think that it's important to note that my PhD, as I noted in my other podcast with the adoptee situation, I was identified non-scientifically, non-medically by nurses at my orphanage that I possibly might have been mentally retarded. And so obviously having a PhD is a great, great achievement. And I got the PhD before the 1990 ADA. I got the PhD, I got it after the 1990 ADA, but I got it at the time that there was none of the kinds of equal accesses that students today appreciate and enjoy. So I had to do it the tough way. I had to work with elbow grease. There were no accommodations for me. I just had to negotiate and do what I had to do to get. I struggled with math, and I had to do what I had to do to make sure that I succeeded in statistics, because if I didn't do well in statistics, I would not be able to finish my degree. So there are things.
What made you pursue the PhD? Because that is a lot of work, and like you aptly said, you had to put in a lot of elbow grease.
Well, I was working full time in Michigan State, and I was working in the College of Education. Our office was located in the College of Education building, and I knew a couple of people, colleagues, who I didn't think were particularly bright.
I'm guilty of that in my MBA course.
For many reasons, I didn't think they were particularly bright. So I thought, well, if they could be in the doctoral program, I certainly could try to be in it. So I decided to apply. I got accepted, and I took 7 years to complete it because I was working full-time in my job, my Michigan State position, and was working my PhD part-time. And so then when I finally completed it, it was quite the victory, right? It was a good feeling to get done.
I bet. You know, I always told myself if I could get paid to go to school forever, I would love nothing more.
Yeah.
But now I get to follow my passion and learn from guests like you every single time I sit down in front of a mic. But you mentioned, you know, working at Michigan State while getting your PhD, but you've also led at schools like UC Berkeley.
Yes.
And now CSU Sacramento. What has this journey taught you about how schools really engage or fail to in regards to disability?
I have to say that the journey has been very interesting. I have been in all universities until I got to California, the highest ranking individual with a visible disability ever. When I got to California, finally, there were individuals that had disabilities that were in higher level positions than me, but I used to always be the highest level administrator. So being the disabled administrator, you know, was kind of like kind of a solo journey. Being in a situation where I'm looking at all these different campuses, I would say Michigan State was very accessible. They were in fact, they were not considering they weren't in Michigan, California, very politically astute. They did a lot of things right there. They had an advocate. They had a woman who had started off as an undergrad there, who was a post-polio chair user, who had been an undergrad there and then went on to become their director, the first director for disability services there. And so she really did a lot of work in making that campus much more accessible. So Michigan State was actually not a problem, you know, very, very future driven. Then I've been to other campuses, and even UC Berkeley, there were challenges regarding their accessibility. It's the birthplace of the disability rights movement, et cetera, but there's a lot of old money, there's a lot of old values, there's a lot of old perspectives, and there were a lot of barriers. But Berkeley's been moving ahead. They now have moved the disability service office from this old building to a newer area, and they now have a disability cultural center. So they are making progress. But they they started off being the roots of the disability rights movement with Ed, Roberts. If you're familiar with Ashby and the Ed Roberts campus, he's known as the father of the independent living movement. We have lots of fathers and mothers in the disability world. So Judy Heumann, mother of disability rights, and all these other people. But Ed Roberts he was one of the quote unquote rolling quads that were very famous for part of the disability rights movement. But anyway, despite the fact that disability rights in Berkeley had this history, they kind of stagnated and didn't have much movement for a while. But I think that there's a different level of activism that's been going on. So I think Berkeley is going to be moving ahead.
That's
I hope.
Good.
And I think other campuses are as well. So there's been pros and cons. I have to say, though, of all the campuses I worked at, the Sac State has been really a joy to work with. It really has.
That's amazing.
In terms of disability, sensitivity, and for example, when I first came to campus, my first week, I went to hear the president do his welcome speech, and behind him was this a big ballroom. And behind him was this big screen where it had like this welcome message on it, but nothing moved on it, There was no captioning. And I remember going to a representative of the president's office saying afterward, I said, there should be captioning back there because I'm back in the ballroom. I couldn't hear what he was saying, and I didn't know what he was saying. Mm-hmm. And so after that point, they had captioning at every event where the president spoke. So they were paying attention. And so we've done, there's a lot of examples of things. that we have done at this campus that I've been a part of.
And I've been able to see firsthand
Yeah.
myself from when I attended. So I can, I have, I guess, maybe some historical context as well. And even friends who have attended the campus, it is such a delight to see what is available. And even walking around the CSUS campus, seeing the accommodations being made to the test takers. And what I will say,
Yes.
what I was very pleasantly surprised by is when you took me around the campus and to the area where the facilities are made available, not just for the students of the university, but for outsiders as well, who are able to come into the campus and, it's open to them, is that how graciously everything was explained to me. You just said, my name, and I was taken around, and not a single point was missed. And it wasn't until after they were done or midway through as when I introduced myself and the reason why I was there, and much later did I say I was an alumni. But everybody is so delighted to say we have these faculties available to us, which is not limited to the campus. Please come use it.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. I've heard you talked about universal design. If you could explain what that is, how it originated, and why it is so important in the context of the conversation that we're having today.
So universal design was first coined by a man named Ron Mace, the father of universal design, another father. Ron Mace was a post-polio. He was also an architect. And so the term is actually rooted in architectural term. It basically, he described it as being, when you build a building, why not make it be as accessible to as many people as possible? So when you think about universal design, it's about building buildings that are not discriminating against any population. So he was very conscious, of course, with steps, et cetera. From universal design, the concept was developed terminology universal design learning, which is now used by educators. And that means then developing a process where when you teach, you have that be as accessible as possible. So ableism, going back to the word ableism, would be the concept of a faculty member who stands in front of a class and orally speaks and then just relies on students to be able to take notes and be able to learn just based on my oral output without using PowerPoint slides, without using any kind of other types of learning tool, right? And so some students learn differently. Some students learn best by seeing, by reading. Other students learn best by hearing, auditory. Other students require being able to hands-on, be able to actually do things, right? So like if you're trying to learn how to prepare a new recipe, you might need to watch, listen, and actually do to master that recipe, right? And this is how it is with students. There's nothing wrong with any one of those modes, but if you're a faculty member and you don't provide those multiple modes of delivery, then you are not teaching to a student who cannot learn from that mode only, but must have another mode, which is why then Disability Services has to step in and provide the interpreter, the captioner, the braille, the alt media, whatever, right? That's where we step in to provide that classroom academic modification adjustment for that student. But yet a faculty utilize universal design, the concept of understanding, to make it be as flexible as possible, using the principles of making it be as accessible as possible, then we would not need to be involved with that type of accommodation. But we could be instead, meaning Disability Services, could be instead involved with working with students individually one-on-one on other matters like disability management, for example, less on how do we get your classroom to get your faculty to share the PowerPoints, because that's very basic. And faculty have that autonomy. They have that authority. They don't need us to provide that authority to a student, but if faculty did that up front, that would be a lot better. So universal design would be, in a non-classroom environment, would be, think about the grocery store. When you go grocery shopping, every grocery store has automatic doors that open. Why? When you think about it, back in the old days when there were no automatic doors, people would buy groceries, but they could only buy maybe 1 or 2 bags of groceries, right? Because you had to carry one bag here, and generally you didn't want to have 2 bags because that would be hard to open doors.
Yeah.
So merchants, how long did it take for merchants to figure out that if we had an automatic door, you could buy more groceries and we could have carts? And now you would have people coming in, not just buying those 10 items or 2 grocery bags, but a whole cart full of stuff.
Yeah.
So that's universal design. Universal design is a curb cut, so that on the street corners. So if you use a scooter or you use a skateboard or whatever, you need that curb cut, it's there for everybody. But it definitely is needed by the person who has a scooter or the wheelchair.
Let me extend it a little bit further into your personal life. Universal design, it's great, and we do have accommodations here in this country, right? And we're trying to get better. But how about when you personally travel outside of the United States?
Oh, goodness. Let me tell you. I just came back from Korea, and I'm going to tell you.
And I was there last year.
Oh, my God.
And obviously, maybe our frames of references and what we observed were different. But let me tell you, those stairs at the subway just knocked the wind out of me. And, I try to stay fairly active, but even for an active person, I just wanted to stomp my feet. And I felt like when I was in China, in the same time periods, the weeks earlier, I didn't feel as much of a strain on me like I did in South Korea.
Yeah. The subway system in South Korea is challenging, but they do have elevators.
Yes, they do.
But they are sometimes maybe it's like in San Francisco with a BART system. Sometimes it's like a couple blocks away, and so you kind of have to have a map to know where the elevator is to get connected to that particular route. And so it is a little challenging to navigate initially, but I found it. Actually, I was fortunate because every time I went into the subway, I generally was with somebody who knew their way around, or if they didn't, we explored together to figure out where was the nearest elevator, and there would be one like maybe a block or 2 away. And so there are parts of Korea, like I was there 14 years ago, and 14 years ago, there were places where they had squat toilets.
China still does,
where you have to straddle the toilet, and it's on the ground. And this time, I did not see them, and they had public bathrooms. And I'm telling you, the public bathrooms in South Korea are nothing like the United States. I mean, these are like super modern, like in the parks. Like in major areas where we would have everything locked up, these are wide open, and you go through the automatic door, and everything is so clean and pristine. So it was amazing. So they've gone a long ways with some of their physical accessibility. And when I had my little scooter and I was traveling around with it, first time I went there, and then the second time I was there, I kind of had to hide the scooter because taxis wouldn't pick you up. Or they'd be very nervous about you. This last time was not a problem.
That's great.
So, I mean, there is more acceptability and understanding of these kinds of things, or at least curiosity.
And I think, if memory serves me correctly, there is a Korean YouTuber who is in a wheelchair who is trying to make some noise and raise awareness around it.
Yeah, the Korean disability rights movement has been really active. They've really been, the last 10 years has been seeing quite a surge. And I mean, again, we're looking at a population, a generation that is where we once were, maybe 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and where we might have to be in another 10 years or so.
Mary Lee, you've also written and extensively edited 5 books and trained leaders across sectors. What really keeps you going in this work, especially, as we've discussed, when change can feel slow?
The work of trying to be in disability service is exhausting.
Yes,
and
I can imagine.
It's very frustrating at times. However, what keeps me going, what gets me passionate, what gets me excited and keeps me moving is being able to make a difference in terms of how educators educate. And that is my primary mission as I see it at Sac State. And when I've been going around is when I go to national conferences and I talk to administrators, I talk about the best practices that Disability Services incorporates to ensure equal access for the students that they serve. And I talk about how those best practices could be transferable in a wider scope for the university as a whole. If you are teaching and you post the lecture notes on and you share the notes with students. Why not share them on Canvas? Why not make everything be accessible up front? Why not make videos and make sure that when you order a video to show in class, that it has subtitles and that has visual descriptions in it up front? Because if you don't do that, then if we have a blind student or a deaf student, we have to hold you up until that student has equal access in the classroom, meaning that those videos had to be converted into accessible format for that deaf or blind student. And then you would be allowed to show that to the rest of the class.
And that's why the work that you're doing is so instrumental.
That's
because
what we do.
It's so, one, it's second nature. We don't think about these things. And two, there's a lack of education that is lacking and awareness that these are also the needs. And I think there's also conditionings that we come with. There's a lot of undoings that need to be done.
And quite honestly, it really comes down to, and I don't mean to speak negatively about faculty, because faculty get hired and they are employed based on their subject matter knowledge, okay? But they're not necessarily trained, and most of them are not trained to understand how to teach.
And that's why I said it's a lack of education.
And they need to go.
Yeah,
and so I work
Training.
closely with the Center for Teaching and Learning. I work closely with the IT department, other departments, so that we make sure that the faculty have the tools and the resources to learn how to become more effective faculty. Because if you only teach to those who can hear you, then that's not teaching to your class. You're teaching to one population. You need to teach to your students who are this broad range, and that means
Which
using
is all
multiple
inclusive,
modes. Multiple modes of delivery. So to me, that's what makes me keep going, is every time a faculty member says, I got it, or when I come across a faculty member who is utilizing multiple modes of delivery, that is important. And every year now, for 3 years, we have had a graduation celebration for our disabled students.
That's amazing.
And each year we have asked the students who are graduating to nominate a faculty member who they believe has been particularly utilizing accessible, universal design or good best practice teaching methods, right? And every year we've been recognizing the faculty for utilizing these kinds of multiple modes of delivery.
Rightfully so, because at any given point in time, a teacher can leave such an impressionable impression on you that you change. You change your major or you change the trajectory of your life, or similarly with a person. That's happened to me when I was an undergrad, why I chose international business and marketing, because I was so impressed by my professor and I was also taking classes at San Francisco State. And I am so glad. I'm so glad. And I'm still so in awe of her as a person and as a teacher. So that's great. Mary Lee, you've gotten into this work, a lifetime of rigorous work, because you want to change and you've seen some of it. What would you say, what does legacy mean to you? Or what would it be for you?
It's interesting because a couple months ago I did a Google search on me. And just out of curiosity.
Everybody does that every now and then.
I think it's good practice. And I learned some fascinating things about myself. I learned, for example, that I was 10 years older than I am. I learned that I also am an MD, which I'm not, but apparently I am according to the internet, so it must be true. I also learned that I am a public figure, which I did not recognize, and I thought, when does one become a public figure? I didn't know what that meant.
You've written and authored 5 books.
Yeah, well, other people have done the same thing, but they're not necessarily on the internet, like that. But I've also learned a lot of my presentations have been posted online. So a lot of these kinds of things have happened. And going to legacy, I have thought about how did I want to be remembered? What do I think about what I've done? And I think, have I done enough? Is there more that I should be doing, right?
No, what I thought you would say is you have survived. And look what you have accomplished.
Oh, yeah. Okay, there's that too. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. I've never really asked anybody the question of, how would you remember me? You know, I mean, I think that would be an interesting question to ask people, you know. Of course, if you think of like the Golden Girls, I don't know if you ever watched the show.
A little bit, yes.
What's her name? Sylvia, the mother, the older lady. Anyway, she had a funeral, but she wasn't dead. But she wanted a funeral just so she could hear what people would say about her. And of course, they were all mad when they found out that she was still alive. But the thing is that that may be something, you know, that would be worth exploring. Would be how do people see me? What would they think? I'm not sure. I don't know what my legacy is. I've been so busy just living my life and just doing what I've been instinctively, gut level, feeling like I need to do.
And I think that's amazing because a lot of people don't live with that gusto and just in motion of what feels right to their soul and following that calling. So you don't have to have your legacy sorted. But I will say, like, in having met you and having recorded 2 episodes with you, my life is more enriched because of what I've learned from you. And I'm just in awe of your strength and your armor. And I say that, I use that word overarchingly to encompass everything you've gone through. But the way you lead, it's so inspiring and motivating. And, you know, many a times, even as we say, a normal person like me would say, I give up. Like, I'm over this shit. Pardon my language.
Oh, like I said, there's mornings I wake up and I'm too old for
and
this
of course, everybody goes through that. But here you are still saying, what more do I have to do? And I think that is admirable. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that.
Now, lastly, too, I want to ask you for the students or anybody out there who is listening, especially if they are disabled and of color, navigating a system that doesn't see them yet. What would you say to them and how they can anticipate their future?
So when I begin presentations, I oftentimes show a picture, a slide of a young girl sitting in front of a full-length mirror. And she's in a rocking chair. And you see the full-length mirror, and in the full-length mirror, the mirror reflects the rocking chair. It reflects all the details of the room, but doesn't reflect the girl. And then I explained that picture as saying that was me growing up, because I looked around at the world and I was not reflected. All the face, I had the first faculty of color that I ever had as a faculty was in college. I was a grad student when I had my first faculty of color. I had my first male faculty when I was in 6th grade. But of color, that was graduate student. So when you think about looking in the mirror and not seeing yourself reflected, that would be from the disability perspective, racial, gender, lots of things. And I tell people by beginning this presentation with that slide, then I move into a picture of my passport photo when I arrived here, when I was about 4 or 5 years old. And I say that was me at the beginning, not seeing myself reflected. And then I go through all these other stories and bits and pieces and talking about the topic of whatever it is I'm supposed to focus on. Ultimately ending with universal design as part of my presentation. And at that point, then I say, when we incorporate universal design, when we start looking at accessibility as a general required need to build that in, that planning up front, et cetera, when we anticipate and we build in all of these things up front. And then I show a picture that I was able to steal from the internet where my face is superimposed on a TV set. And there's this family sitting around the TV. And I say, and this is when you'll start seeing yourself reflected. When all of this happens, when we start recognizing our history, when we start recognizing the intersection of ableism, racism, when we start understanding all of the history of eugenics and genocide and everything that we have gone through the years, and not even all that many years. We're talking about 1930s to where we are today, you know. But the thing is that we could be that person looking in the mirror, not seeing ourselves reflected, and say that's life. Or you could understand the history and recognize it and realize the importance of it and see how you can be a part of that. And then you start
It's your
seeing
choice.
And then at the end, your face on the TV set with the family sitting around it watching you, right? That's when you see that you become, that would be when you can see yourself reflected, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, when you think about legacy, when you think about reflection and building a society where people can feel that they are a part of it, that they're included, then if you feel that strongly, then you need to be a part of that movement. You can't just sit back and expect it to happen for you.
Yeah.
And I think that really comes down to it. You look in the mirror and you don't see yourself reflected. Does it bother you enough to want to be a part of,
I was just going to say,
do something about it?
be the change you want to see.
Correct. Yep.
And so with that, I want to thank you for your time
you.
and thank you for being so candid. I really appreciate it. If I said something that made and asked questions that were too intrusive, forgive me. But you have taken something in what life threw at you and said, okay, I see this, but I'm going to use this and be a champion for change. And I think it is so important in the times we live in is to be the change you want to see. And so you show up. Because when you show up, then you'll find your allies. You'll find the people, the organizations. Yeah. So thank you for the good work, for being such an advocate and being an educator. I've learned so much from you today. I hope you guys have all as well. This is Between Us. Till next time, thank you so much for joining us here.